Welcome to the Agile Career Podcast, where we will take you on the journey from employed for life to employable for life. We'll give you the tips, insights, and strategies to help you build the transferable skills that you'll need. So let's get started. Please welcome your host, Günther Richter.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 10 of the Agile Career Podcast. As usual, I'm really happy that you can join me on this episode. And in this episode, our 10th one, as I've said, we're going to do things slightly differently. It's going to be along the format of some of the earlier shows, so we don't have a guest on here today. And the reason for that is because I wanted to talk about something that is really important, and it's something that has come up time and time again, and I thought it important to I guess share the topic with you and talk a little bit more about that, and that is the subject of focus, or being able to focus. So what got me thinking about this a lot was obviously some of the things that have been coming up through the interviews that we've been doing over the last few weeks, but also through some of my mentoring work, speaking to entrepreneurs and people looking to grow their careers. And some of the challenges they face, one of the key things that comes out in these discussions and thinking about the way forward is focus. It's sometimes lack of focus, and it's focus that's needed to carry you forward. A good example, for instance, is someone thinking about some short-term objectives, saying, well, I really need to get my career up and running, or I need to get this business up and running, and I need some short-term income. But at the same time, starting to think about things like, I think I want to start another startup, or I want to go and launch this website, or maybe I'm going to partner with this person and do this thing. And instead of focusing on the things that are important, they tend to get distracted. So I think this is why focus is very important, and equally so for our careers and developing our skills, it's very important. So this episode is going to be all about focus, and I'm going to sort of split it into two areas. And the first area is going to be focusing on the bigger things. So what about, what are your long-term goals? What are those things you're looking to achieve? And then the second bit is really going to be along the lines of focusing on the smaller things, so things like productivity and not getting distracted and those sorts of things. So that's really what I want to focus on today. Just before we do get started, though, I'd like to remind everyone about the review party we got going on. I'd please love it if you could go along to whichever platform you listen to the podcast on, leave an honest review, and I will be doing a lucky draw, and someone who leaves a review will be winning a £15 Amazon gift card. So please go along, do the review, send me a snapshot of the review so I know that you've left one and I know who left it, and I will enter you into the lucky draw. Please remember, you've only got till the 12th of June to do this. We're running out of time, so go along, subscribe to the podcast at the same time, leave a review, and stand a chance to win a £15 Amazon gift card. And so to get started, I think thinking about how you focus in a broader perspective is thinking about your career as the same way that an organization thinks about its strategy. So for examples, most organizations will have a vision and a mission statement. Often there's a lot of confusion around the two. So before we use those as examples, let's just clear that up. So typically a vision statement is a statement that sets out what the organization wants to achieve in the long term, and in the same way, this could be something that you want to achieve from a career perspective in the long term. And then a mission statement obviously goes along hand in hand with that, and the mission statement typically talks about how you're going to get to achieve that vision. So what are the broad, not steps, but how are you going to move forward and achieve that? So a really good example that I've pulled out is Nike's vision and mission statement. So I think these are really good examples. So if we look at Nike's vision statement, it is to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. They do say that if you have a body, you're an athlete. So this basically means everyone. So I'll read that again. It's to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And then if we look at their mission statement, it is create groundbreaking sports innovations, make our products sustainably, build a creative and diverse global team, and make a positive impact in communities where we live and work. So they're related. You can see, though, the vision statement sets out what they want to achieve, and the mission statement goes on to talk about how they're going to do that. So in the same way that Nike set up this really good vision and mission statement, you can do the same for your career. So kind of laying out what that longer term thing is you want to achieve, and then thinking about how you're going to get there. Now, to help you with this, it's good to start thinking about this probably in the short, medium, and long term sense. So start thinking about those longer term goals. Think about the medium ones and think about the short term ones as well. Obviously, the shorter term ones you'll probably tend to have more detail on. You'll have a little more clarity on potentially how you're going to achieve those. And then as you start moving off into the distance from those, to those medium and longer term goals, you're probably going to have less detail. And this is always the case. But the one thing to be cognizant of, I think, is don't get too blinded by just focusing on your long-term goals. It is often easy just to put your head down and just charge straight forwards. And when we're too focused on those longer term goals, we sometimes tend to miss the things that change around us. So our environment, our organizations that we work in, our family situations, everything changes around us. And if you are too focused on those long-term goals, you might not notice those circumstances changing around you. And the danger of this is that once those circumstances change and you don't notice them, you're not going to be able to change the way that you are going to behave or the steps that you're going to put in place to still look at achieving that longer term goal. Or in fact thinking, is that longer term goal now valid, or do I need to tweak it a bit? So just be cognizant of that. So we've spoken about objectives and creating those objectives. And I think it's pretty easy to sit back and say, well, I want to retire by the age I'm 55, to use an example of one of the guests, Doug, who laid that out on the podcast where he interviewed, and just kind of forgetting about it and going about your day-to-day, tasks and those sorts of things. So yes, it's important to create objectives, but very importantly, you need to write your objectives down. And it may seem like a silly thing, but there is research that demonstrates that people that write down their objectives have a much higher chance of achieving them. And this is valid because it allows you then to come back every now and then and check in against how you're doing in achieving those objectives. So, for example, you could set a few different types of objectives. One of them might be income, and say, well, at the end of this year, I want to be earning this much, or at the end of next year, or in 2 years' time, these are my targeted earnings. You can also put sort of less quantitative things down, like, I want to be able to develop this set of skills, or I want to go and do this diploma or this course. It could be things like, I want to be able to do X amount of blog posts per month, So write those things down and come back to them. You don't have to come back to them every day, but, visit them once a month or visit them on a fortnightly basis and look at how you're doing against those goals that you've laid out. And this makes it so much more powerful and easy to track against how you're doing. And also then where you're lagging behind, for instance, is to, kick things into action. So if you said you were going to achieve X by this month and you haven't, you can then really go and say, okay, well, whatever I've been doing hasn't been working. What is it that I now need to do that can get me back on track? So really important, write them down, because if you don't write them down, it's kind of difficult to cast your mind back and think, well, yeah, I kind of said I'm going to earn X amount by the end of the year, but, let's just see how it goes. So write those down and review them on a, not too frequent, but review them on a regular basis. When you determine what these objectives are, they need to be specific. So you need to be able to describe them out in a little more detail. And, think about the example of wanting to lose weight, for example. You can say, my objective is to lose weight. Okay, so yes, good objective, but it's not really well described. How do you know when you've met success? So what does success look like? So be a little more specific and say, well, I want to lose 10 kilograms. Be more specific about saying over what time frame. Is it going to be 6 months or a year? So lay out a time frame. Again, that adds a little more specificity, if I said that correctly, to your objective. And then it makes it a bit easier to break down the steps in terms of how you're going to get to that objective. So if you're going to lose 10 kilograms over 6 months, you know that you need to lose at least, 1.6 kilograms per month. And that becomes a lot easier to track, because come the end of month one, if you've achieved that, great, you're on track. But if you haven't, you've got some work to do. You've got some catching up to do. So be really clear about your objectives and some of the steps you're going to take to get to those. And in a few minutes, we're going to talk about a good method to do that. Amount of energy, I can move X amount away from the circle. But then he shows another diagram where he takes that same size circle and basically takes the 12 lines and lays those end to end. And what that does is that shows you he's taking one thing 12 times further than taking 12 things, a short distance. And this is the whole thing about him for focus. And really what he says in his book is that you need to stop the undisciplined pursuit of more. So that's chasing those 12 things and not doing them very well. And you need to start the disciplined pursuit of less. So it's focusing on that one or those two things that are really important and throwing all your energy behind those. And that way you're going to make a lot more traction with the goals you want to achieve. So then, as I said earlier, thinking about those goals and those objectives, how can we begin to start laying out what these goals look like? How do you define them? And, there's a number of ways to do this. And one of the ways I've been spending a lot of time lately looking at and using is OKRs. And these OKRs stand for Objectives and Key Results. And this methodology goes back years. It was started by Andy Grove, the then, CEO of Intel. And he used this approach very, very successfully to obviously grow his success, but Intel as an organization as well. More lately, it's a widely used approach by Google. Google uses it to set their strategy and execute their strategy. And to that degree, there's actually a very good downloadable book. It's the Google OKR playbook. It's only 5 pages long, and I'll include the link in the show notes. And that really gives some great examples of what those objectives look like and what those key results look like. So I'll leave the Google example for now, and you're welcome to go and read that from the download link. It really is a worthwhile read. And as I say, it's only 5 pages. You can cover it quickly. So how do we determine then what's the difference between objectives and results? So the objectives are what we want to achieve, and the results are how we want to achieve them. So in this instance, it's quite important to note that results aren't activities. Results need to describe outcomes. They're not just activities. So if you set an objective to say, I want to earn X amount per year, you're not going to say, I'm going to go to work every month, or, I'm going to look for a job. Those are activities. You need to start thinking about results. So you might say, okay, by the end of this year, I want to find a new job in which I can earn X amount of money per year. So then how are you going to achieve that? So obviously you're going to do a lot of looking for jobs. You might do some networking to talk to people. You might go to interviews. You might do job applications, all of those sorts of things. And those things, although they're activities, think about the results that you get from those. So you could say, I want to submit my CV to 10 companies per month, or I want to be able to land 1 interview per week, or I want to network with 5 people per month. So these become a little more tangible, and you can measure your progress against them. And why this is important is that it's cognizant of the fact that you've got this really big objective, this big, hairy, audacious goal that you want to achieve. And it's not often a binary thing of either you've achieved it or you haven't. Ultimately, success dictates that, yes, you should achieve it. But tracking these results lets you understand your progress towards that goal. So you can visibly see whether you're making progress or not. And obviously, if you're not making progress, you can adjust what it is you're doing. If you are making progress, that's great. Then it says that you're doing the right things to achieve that goal. Now, you can break down your objectives into two camps of objectives as well. You can have committed objectives, and those are ones that you absolutely have to achieve to be able to turn around and say, I've made a success of this. And then aspirational ones are ones that you may not achieve. Think of them as like stretch goals. So the OKR approach is really good. It's a really solid system. You can use it in organizations. You can use it for careers. You can use it for setting goals at home. It's really applicable to so many situations. And if you want to know more about this, there's a great book by John Dewar. Again, I'll include the link in the show notes. So that's a really good book to read through. And then, as I said, the Google Playbook, the OKR Playbook, that I'll include the link for as well. Go ahead through that, read that, and there's some really good insights in there as well. Okay, well, that's part one concluded. So now we've taken the journey through a number of approaches we can use to set those bigger objectives. How then do we focus on moving forward? So there's a lot of stuff we need to do to achieve those objectives. How then do we stop getting distracted? How do we motivate ourselves to move forward and do the things we need to do to achieve these goals? And this is difficult because everybody has problems focusing. It's a human thing. It's human nature. Sometimes it is so much easier just to sit down and binge watch Netflix or to dawdle around on social media. And as I said, it's human nature. Everyone has problems focusing sometimes. So how can we then try and eliminate some of these, distractions? What are the sorts of tools and tips that we can use to maintain focus? So I'm going to cover off a few. And as we said in episode 6, I think it was, in understanding yourself, knowing your strengths and weaknesses will really help you. So, and I want to emphasize the weaknesses on this bit, because if you know, for example, that you are fixated on tracking some item in the news, you know that as soon as something flashes up on your screen, you're going to be drawn to that, or you're going to have the BBC news page open or CNN news page or whatever it is. So if you know that it is a weakness, switch it off. You can take a step to action that. So understand your weaknesses, understand what are the things that cause you to not make progress. So I think in episode 1 or 2, I mentioned procrastination, and procrastination is a huge one. Now, I know there's a lot of discussion around procrastination can be good. It provides an element of creativity, and typically people that procrastinate do tend to be more creative. But again, procrastination can be a massive problem, and it can really stop you achieving what it is you want to achieve. So how do we then overcome procrastination? Well, the first thing is just start. Just make a start. If you sit back and you think about how difficult something's going to be, or you're thinking about what a slog this is going to be, you're just going to put off starting, and you're never going to do that thing. So just take the first step and make that start. Sometimes the things we need to do are not pleasant, and it may be doing a mundane report, or it may be compiling some data, or it could be something that you don't like doing. So one of the approaches that you can use, and this is an approach that Brian Tracy, an author, suggested, and he calls it eat the frog. And basically what this means is take your most unpleasant task, or your biggest task, and do that first. Get that out of the way. And the reason for it being called eat the frog is it goes back to, it talks about an African myth or a story that says eat the frog, because eating the frog is really unpleasant. And if you do that the first thing in the morning, everything else you do in the rest of the day is going to be easier. So get that unpleasant task out of the way first, eat that frog, and then move on. Because once you've done that really difficult thing, everything's going to be a little bit easier after that. Uh, Also think about rewarding yourself after you've achieved something. So say, well, the next 3 or 4 hours, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this chapter, or I'm going to write this report, or whatever it is you're doing, and say, once I'm done, I'm going to go out and grab a coffee and take a half an hour break. So reward yourself. It's something that reinforces, it's that positive reinforcement that makes you sit down and focus on a task or get that task done. Again, sometimes we lay out really big things for ourselves, and what's important is breaking these tasks down into smaller steps. So again, if you look at perhaps say, I want to write a book, it's an overwhelming thing. You got to think about, I got to do all this writing, I've got to do the planning, I've got to get the topics, and then how am I going to write this all up? Who's going to proofread it? Who's going to edit it? How am I going to get it published? You're just setting yourself up for failure. So just break it down into smaller steps. Just think about, well, all I've got to do is write the introduction, get that first step done, and then once you've got smaller steps in place, you can achieve those more easily than just trying to take on this big thing that isn't really, I don't want to say clearly defined, but something that is really overwhelming. Another approach to avoid procrastination is to plan out the things you need to do. So if you've got a task list or a to-do list, schedule blocks in your diary, and it could be this week, it could be next week, it could be in 2 weeks' time, but schedule time to get those tasks done. And this is something that I found works really well for me. I've, for years tried this sort of to-do list thing, and it works to a limited degree, but what I tend to find works better is to look at the things that I need to do, the important things, and we're going to cover this in a few minutes as well. How do you deem what's important and what needs doing and what doesn't need doing? But to take those important things and plan them into your diary and say, on Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to do this thing. So that's really helpful. What also is useful is if you look at getting into a regular cadence for something, it might be you might struggle to spend time with your team, for example, or you might need to review a set of sales numbers on a regular basis. What you can do there is, set regular times to say, think of it as like an if-then statement to say, well, okay, every Monday at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to review these sales figures, or every Friday afternoon at 2, I'm going to sit with my team and we're going to have a catch up. And once you get into that habit, you train your mind, because you get to Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock and you say, hey, okay, if it's 2 o'clock on a Friday, I need to sit down with my team and have a catch up. Or if it's 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, I need to get those sales figures out and have a look at them. So that's a great tool to help avoid procrastination and get into the habit of doing things regularly. So now that we've kind of worked out how we can schedule things in and get into a cadence and tackle procrastination and deal with the things that we need to deal with, how do we avoid things like temptation? It's, again, so easy to get tempted to go and check your Facebook account, what's going on Twitter. And, these things are going to happen. So ways that we can think about it, avoiding this is to try and avoid the distraction. So switch off notifications, for example. Going into a meeting, most people take their phones with them into meetings, and I know we're not meeting face to face nowadays because of the lockdown we have all over. But when you go into a meeting, either put your phone in your pocket, or don't take your phone with you at all, or lay your phone face down so that you don't see notifications popping up. This is especially true with social media, because we get hooked. And social media companies are so great at doing this. How do they get their users hooked into checking Twitter or Facebook 5 times, 10 times, 20 times a day? It's by doing these notifications, for example. So, disable those notifications. Don't get tempted by them. But at the same time, don't say, if you do enjoy catching up on social media, don't take it away from yourself totally, but reward yourself, with it. So you can plan this in. You can say, okay, well, once I've spent 3 hours doing this thing that I need to do, I'm going to spend 15 minutes reading the news or 10 minutes checking Twitter. So reward yourself, but only once that you've done the important things that you need to get done. So again, it's really difficult to deal with these, and there's always going to be distractions and temptations. The other thing that is really drawing away from being able to focus is multitasking. And I think in this day and age, we feel that we have to multitask. There's so many demands on our time. There's so many people asking us stuff, colleagues, family stuff, all of those sorts of things. And we tend to sometimes think, and many people do, that multitasking is the answer to this. And you might think you're being successful, but, research shows that there's between a 20 and 40% overhead of multitasking. So, each time you switch tasks, there's an overhead to get up and running. There's a switching cost, which comes, it's a term that used to be used in computing. And, this introduces a massive amount of overhead. And each time you switch tasks, you're incurring that overhead. And in the bigger scheme of things, you're probably losing 20 to 40% of your time. Think about also the 80-20 rule. So if you've got a lot of stuff to do or multiple tasks, focus on the one thing that you can spend 20% of the time doing, but that's going to achieve 80% of the results. So again, not always easy it's easy to conceptualize, but not easy to put into practice. But think carefully about what those tasks are. Another way to deal with, to avoid multitasking is to batch tasks up. So, taking similar tasks and doing them all together. Think about it like email. So rather than sitting, doing some work, you might be writing a report, doing a bit of research, preparing a presentation, and you've got those emails pinging into your inbox. You've got a notification popping up. You can hear it go ping, switching into your email software, looking at that email, responding to it, switching out again to the tasks you were doing. That's multitasking at its worst, and it's going to totally destroy your focus. So batch those things up, and what you can do is say, I'm going to focus for 2-3 hours or whatever it is on this task, this presentation, or this piece of research, and then I'm going to go and spend half an hour and work through my inbox. I'm going to tackle all of the emails, and then I'm going to switch that off, and I'm going to go on with this other thing. So you can do that, do it 2 to 3 times per day, and this way it's much easier to batch things up. And it could be applicable to other things as well. Think about creating your expenses at work. Again, tackling them on an expense item by expense item basis, is time consuming. Batch them all up, do them all at once, get them done. So think about batch processing. That works really well. And we've used that example. I've just talked about them doing that in email as well. That also works really well. We touched briefly on distractions. It was kind of veiled under the topic of temptation, being tempted to go and check social media. But the other thing to think about distractions is that there's only a limited amount of willpower that you have. And Cal Newport talks about this in his book called Deep Work, and he calls it the attention fatigue. And it talks about us having a limited reserve of willpower that we can use to avoid distractions. So that first notification might ping up on your phone and you can ignore it. The second one you can ignore it. But eventually, as you are ignoring all of those things, your attention reserve is draining, and this fatigue is building up. And eventually, you're going to break, and you're going to check that notification. So it's important then to think about getting rid of these distractions, so you can really keep this reserve of attention to avoid distractions. So this could be things like putting a do not disturb on your door, or do not disturb on your instant messenger notification. Create working time for yourself, move off into a quiet room or an office or a boardroom. Do all of these things to stop getting distracted, and because eventually, as I said, that reserve is going to get depleted, and you're not going to be able to do away with those distractions. Things like unsubscribing to email lists. You probably get so much junk in your email box. Go through that and unsubscribe to all these subscription lists. You're going to really reduce all the distractions. Another tip for avoiding distractions, especially working in an open office, as I think most of us do these days, is to wear headphones. And, these are a good way to drown out the noise around you. You can listen to music or whatever it is, It also often avoids people coming over and asking you things. They'll see you listening to something, they'll know you're busy with something, they'll tend not to interrupt. Of course, the one danger I find with this is it sometimes breaks down communication and sometimes productivity in the office sense. That's a bit of a slippery slope, but often, the use of headphones does give you more focus and does stop distractions, whether there are people walking by and interrupting you, or whether it's people, if you're sitting near the coffee station, for example, people going over and having a water cooler chat and distracting you. So think about using headphones, and also, they're great for drowning out external noise if you're working near a motorway or a busy intersection, or perhaps, as you might have heard on the podcast now, the ice cream van just driving around the neighborhood here with its tune blaring. And then a really controversial tip, to help us focus more is learning to say no. Now, this is really difficult, especially if you're a people pleaser. Generally, people don't like saying no, because it seems like, you're being difficult, or you're being unhelpful, or you're being a nasty person. But you really need to think about this limited amount of time that you have to focus on activities and learn to say no. And think about, if I am saying yes to something, what am I going to say no to? So you can't do everything. If I'm saying yes to this item, what am I going to say no to? And a good way to think about this approach is in the way that we do often in Agile or Scrum methodology, where we use a Kanban board and a backlog. And in this backlog, we have a whole lot of tasks that we need to do to achieve the successful outcome of this project. And we tackle those in a sprint by sprint basis. And in the sprint, we've got a limited amount of time or effort. What are the tasks that we're going to cover off in this 1 week or 2 week period? Or could even be a day, whatever that period is. And think, okay, if priorities change, if something else comes along and we're told now that this other thing is important and we need to do it now, what are we going to take out of the stuff that we're currently doing? So a good approach to learning to say no is to take that approach. So if your boss comes along and asks you to do something that they say is important, yes, you don't want to say no to your boss, but equally so you can say, yes, I'm happy doing that, but what should I stop doing, for instance? What can I do later? So that's a good approach to help you to say no. Also think, what will happen if you say no? If you say no to a friend asking you for help, or if you say no to a colleague, thinking about what that means if you do say no gets you to a place where you realize that it might not be a bad thing. So, just don't automatically assume that no is bad. Sometimes no is okay. And actually, it's the company that I work at Data Consulting. One of our company values is no is okay. So it's okay to say no. But again, you need to think about it in the context of some of the things I've just spoken about. And another good tip is when people ask you, I guess, to do favors, or people want some of your time, and a good way, you don't want to just say no. You typically want to give some kind of excuse, or not even an excuse. It might be a valid reason. They might ask you, can you come and help me with this formatting in my Word document? And you'll say, no, I can't, because I really need to get this client report done. So you can reply in two ways then when you do turn people down. And yes, it's important that you turn them down graciously. And you can say, and Cal Newport talks about this as well, is you can give a very specific answer and say, well, sorry, I can't help you with the formatting in your Word document just now, because I've got this really important sales report to do, or this client report to do. The danger with that sometimes is the person will then say to you, okay, well, once you've done with that report, can you help me? Or how long will it take you to do that report? Can you help me then? So you can also give a generic answer, and you can say, sorry, I can't help you with your Word document because I'm really busy right now. And that sometimes shuts off the conversation a little quicker than giving a really specific example. But again, these are just different tools and approaches you can use, and you can try them out. You can decide which ones are going to be applicable to your situation. what does happen then when you do get distracted or you do get pulled off onto another task and you need to refocus, you need to change back to the stuff you were doing? Well, there's a number of approaches you can use here, and the one is a triage approach. And again, this is not only applicable for when you needing to refocus or get drawn back to the original task at hand. You can use this all the time. And I mean, obviously, triage is used very extensively in accident and emergency, dealing with the most important issues first. And you can do this as well at a work level or a task level. You can triage your tasks, do those ones that need the attention first, the most important ones first. But this is sometimes difficult to do because, what determines what's important or what determines this thing needs to get done now? And a really good tool I found is useful here is something called the Eisenhower matrix. Obviously, after Eisenhower, the famous American. And what he suggested doing was taking two categories of things, almost drawing up a matrix. So you have urgency and importance. And if on one axis you say urgent on one side, not urgent on the other axis you say important and not important, you're going to come up with kind of 4 squares. And then you can go through your tasks and say, okay, what tasks are urgent and important? And those are tasks that you need to do now. You can then go and see what tasks are important but not urgent. You can go and schedule time in to get those done. And, as I said before, you can book a time in the future in your diary. And then you're going to end up with some tasks that are urgent but not important. And those you can delegate. You might not have the luxury of delegating them to someone else, but you can delegate them down your timeline, or, you can delegate them back to the person who asked them to do that thing for you. And then the fourth category of things you're going to get are tasks that are not urgent and not important. And these are ones you just need to chuck in the bin. Think about it. If something's not urgent and it's not important, why are you doing it at all? So just get rid of that. And this is a really good approach to help you triage your tasks and plan out your activities that you need to do. So that's things urgent and important, you do now. Not urgent and important, you schedule. Urgent but not important, you delegate. And not urgent and not important, you just trash. So we've spoken about getting distracted and sometimes needing to go off and deal with something. You might be at work doing something really important and a raging customer comes in and needs attending to straight away. That's not something you can ignore. So, at the best of plans, you're going to have to deal with this urgent thing right now. How do you then get back on track? You might come back to the work you were doing and think, actually, if there's only an hour left this afternoon, it's a write-off, I'll just continue tomorrow. No, that's not a great approach because you're losing an hour. But yeah, so what are some of the things you can do about getting back on track? You can think about, okay, well, this thing that I was busy with, if I don't do it, what's the impact? What's the impact on that bigger goal I want to achieve? And, if the impact is minimal, then, okay, it's probably not too bad to postpone it. But if the impact is bigger, then, think, okay, well, let me focus on this thing right now. You can also take some of your negative thoughts, as I've just said, you're coming back to this, you say, I've been so distracted now, I've had to deal with this irate customer, I've only got an hour left, and, no, it's just rubbish. Take that negative thought, and reframe it into a positive thought. So think about, well, actually, I've been distracted, but I've had a really good opportunity to, increase customer satisfaction or make a customer really happy, or, I've got this task to do now that I've got to come back to. And it's a real slog now to get back into this and find out where I was, get my mind back into it. That's a negative thought. Turn that into a positive thought and think, well, okay, if I finish this task before I go home today, how good is that going to make me feel? So take that negative thought and turn it into a positive thought. And then the last tip here around getting back on track is sometimes, taking a break or giving yourself a bit of a reboot or giving your mind a bit of a refresh. And meditation, for example, has become very popular. It's become a lot more mainstream than it used to be. There's some really good apps out there, and a good one is Headspace, and that's one I personally use. It's got a lot of value, and it's just taking 5 minutes or 10 minutes, getting your mind to calm down. Just resetting your mind, and then cracking on with that task you were busy with. So yeah, taking a bit of quiet time, meditation. It might be going for a walk outside. It might be just getting a breath of fresh air, getting some sunshine on your face. Anything like that. Then the last tip I've put in here, and this is one I think that a lot of people struggle with, and that's being present. How often do we go into a meeting and we've got other things on our mind? We've got our mobile phones with us. We've got our laptops with us. We're checking email while the person in the meeting's talking. We're thinking about what we're going to be doing after the meeting. We'll be thinking about what we're going to have for lunch. We'll be at home having a conversation with our partner. We're thinking about what we're going to be doing at work tomorrow. Our children will be wanting to spend some time with us, and we'll be thinking about the cooking and cleaning we have to do. And it really is difficult being present and focusing on that moment in time. And a really good technique that I've found is useful, and this is something that Brendan Bouchard mentions in his book High Performance Habits. It's a really good read I can recommend. Again, I'll put the link in the show notes. And he says that there's two things really, and it's when you're transitioning from task to task. So think about going, you're busy writing that client report, and now you have to go into a meeting about something else. Take a moment to reset moving between those two tasks. And, don't go into that meeting now still thinking about your client report. Take a moment to reset. And the second thing is to say, well, okay, what is this one thing that I need to do to show up in this meeting? So I'm going into this meeting. It might be about a new product. What do I need to do to deliver value or to show up in that meeting? What's the one thing? Having that conversation with your spouse as well. Take that reset. Don't think about work. You just come from a hairy day at the office. Reset. Go into that conversation with your spouse and think, what do I need to do to show up in this conversation? What do I need to do to be able to ultimately, I guess, serve others? Whether you going into an activity with your kids, a conversation with your spouse, whether you go into a client meeting, those two things are really helpful. Take that moment to reset between activities, and then think about what that one thing is that you really need to do to show up. So it feels like we really covered off a lot, and I think we have. But just to summarize then, we focused on focus. As I said at the start of the show, I think this is something that's really important, and it's a skill that we all need to develop. We all need to get better at, because it really will serve us well. Again, it's one of those transferable skills that you can take from job to job and role to role. We split it up into two. We talked about longer term focus and setting those bigger goals. And then we spoke about focus more on a granular level and how to avoid distractions, avoid the temptation, and basically how to get stuff done. So I hope that's been really helpful. If it has been helpful, please leave a review on whatever platform you listen to. I would be really, really grateful. All of the feedback does help me shape the show. And I'd like to remind you as well, we've kind of got the review party going. We're really running out of time. You've only got till the 12th of June to leave a review, in which you stand a chance of winning a £15 Amazon gift card. So please go to your favorite platform where you listen to this podcast, like this podcast, and leave a review. And I'll be doing a lucky draw, and one person leaving a review will win that gift card. So please go along and do that. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the show. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to you in the next show. Take care. Bye-bye.